Before the invention of photography, being the subject of a portrait was typically the exclusive province of the very wealthy, because hiring a painter is expensive. But that wasn't always the case. A number of interesting stories and anecdotes have survived about the individual subjects of famous paintings. Today on Weird History, we're illuminating the backstories behind who some of the people in famous paintings actually were. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and leave us a comment letting us know what other art history topics you would like to hear about next. Okay, time to break out that Etch-a-Sketch. Andrew Wyeth's 1948 painting, Christina's World, arguably one of the most famous American paintings of the 20th century, depicts a woman on the ground in a treeless brown field, looking up at a barn and other buildings in the distance, as though she just got dropped off at the wrong Airbnb. Currently, that painting is on display in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's one of two paintings hanging up in the otherworldly hotel room that astronaut David Bowman finds himself in at the end of Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey. But Stanley Kubrick didn't include it in the film version. The woman featured in the painting was Anna Christina Olsen of Cushing, Maine. In life, she suffered from a degenerative muscular disorder and hadn't been able to walk since early childhood. While many viewers of the painting assume the woman is seated in the field, looking up at the barn, Wyeth is actually depicting Olsen's preferred way of getting around. She didn't like to use a wheelchair, so she would simply crawl around from place to place. In fact, Wyeth thought up the concept for the painting after seeing Olsen crawling around a field outside his window, which is kind of terrifying. Maybe the painting should have been scarier. While Olsen inspired the painting, Wyeth actually used his wife, Betsy, as his primary model. By the time Wyeth painted her world, the real Christina Olsen was already 55 years old, so it was easier to have Betsy model the specific position of the woman's torso. And also, it would have been a little weird to ask a disabled retiree to lay in the dirt for hours on end so he could make his painting. The house featured in the background is still known as Olsen House and remains open to the public and was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 2011. Another iconic depiction of rural life in the U.S., American Gothic, was painted by American artist Grant Wood in 1930. It can currently be seen at the Art Institute of Chicago and on the front of countless shoebox greeting cards. Wood was visiting a local painter named John Sharp in the town of Eldon, Iowa, when he saw what was then known as the Dibble House, a small white home built in an architectural style known as Carpenter Gothic. Wood was struck by the odd juxtaposition of a medieval Gothic-style window in an otherwise very simple frame house, and felt it would be very paintable, easy for him to say. He later decided to include images of the kinds of people he imagined would live in that house in the painting. But rather than knocking on strangers' doors and explaining that he thought their windows looked silly, the artist recruited his sister Nan to serve as his model for the young resident. To pose as the painting's farmer, Wood selected his family dentist, Dr. Byron McKeeby of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Though today the couple in American Gothic are often assumed to be husband and wife, Wood had always envisioned them as a father and his daughter. The painting's two elements were created entirely separately. Wood's sister and McKeeby never stood together in front of the actual house. That's good old-fashioned movie magic. Or painting magic. Sounds less magical when you say it that way. Belgian surrealist master René Magritte's familiar 1946 work, The Son of Man, features a well-dressed gentleman in a bowler hat whose face is entirely obscured behind a green apple. The painting is a chronicle of the day Belgium was attacked by giant sentient apples. Well, actually, Magritte intended the guy behind the apple to be a variation on himself. The artist later explained that the simple act of obscuring his face makes the image more interesting, as people always have more curiosity about seeing what's being hidden from them. Sir John Everett Malay's mid-19th century painting, Ophelia, depicts the character from Shakespeare's play Hamlet, moments before her tragic drowning. The details in the painting are modeled specifically on Shakespeare's description of the scene. It's currently in the collection of London's Tate Britain Gallery, if you feel like traveling a long way to have a good cry. Millet painted the landscape and background details first, based on the Hogsmill River in Ewell. His model was 19-year-old Elizabeth Siddal, who was featured in a number of key works from British artists throughout her life, including Walter Deverell, William Holman Hunt, and her husband, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. She posed for the painting in the dead of winter, fully clothed in a bathtub, with oil lamps lit strategically around the room in an attempt to keep her warm. But Siddal apparently still caught a bad cold or possibly even pneumonia during the sessions. Her father later sent Millet a letter demanding an additional £50 fee for medical expenses, but future correspondents suggest Millet eventually talked him down to a lower sum. A model named Victorine Meur posed for French Impressionist Edouard Manet's 1863 The Luncheon on the Grass at the tender age of 18. She's totally nude, enjoying a picnic in the park with two men, while another woman bathes in the background. That sounds like a good picnic. At the time, Meur was a working-class singer and guitarist who often performed as a busker on the street. She also became a regular muse for Manet, posing for his later paintings, Street Singer and Olympia. But aside from just being featured in the paintings, Meur had artistic ambitions of her own. She would often work out creative ideas along with Manet, and went on to her own career as a painter. At the time, women artists were not taken as seriously, and most of her work has been lost over time. Leonardo da Vinci's Renaissance masterpiece, the Mona Lisa, remains arguably the most famous and iconic painting of all time. It's still one of the most popular things for tourists to see in Paris, a city that is literally packed full of stuff for tourists to see. It's also weirdly tiny to see in person, like Tom Cruise. For many years, historians debated the identity of the woman who posed for the painting, though now it's pretty universally believed to be Italian noblewoman Lisa Gherardini del Giocondo. In 2005, a note seemingly written by Da Vinci was found confirming del Giocondo's identity as the model. Some questions do still remain about the real Lisa and the painting that bears her name, aside from that thing about how her eyes follow you around the room. It's believed that she was born in Florence and was married to a silk merchant, but it's unclear how she came to be painted by the great Leonardo or when it exactly happened. Various accounts date the painting from sometime between 1503 and 1513. It's also believed that Lisa may have been pregnant while sitting for the portrait, but that's also unconfirmed. Finally, it seems Da Vinci never actually delivered the finished product to the Giocondo family, instead keeping it for himself, and ultimately bequeathing it to a favorite apprentice, Salai, after his death. Art historians have also long debated the identity of painter Johan Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring, as featured in his famed 1665 work. Many believe that the woman is actually the Dutch artist's eldest daughter, Maria Vermeer, while others suggest it was actually his mistress, which is a pretty significant distinction. Still, other scholars contend that no model actually sat for the painting, and Vermeer just invented the woman out of whole cloth, possibly intending for her to represent a biblical figure or a character from classical mythology. Lingering questions about its subject have likely contributed to the painting's popularity. The mystery inspired the Tracy Chevalier novel Girl with a Pearl Earring, which suggested that the model was actually Vermeer's maid. This book was adapted into a 2003 film with Scarlett Johansson. Another artwork that's long been shrouded in mystery is Jan van Eyck's 1434 oil painting depicting a couple taking marriage vows, commonly known as the ARNOLFINI portrait. The painting is noteworthy for its intricate use of complicated symbols and iconography, its geometric orthogonal perspective, the way Van Eyck expands the space by using a mirror strategically situated behind the couple, and for the couple's rocking fashion sense. An 1857 book first identified the couple in the painting as Giovanni di Arrigo Arnolfini, a merchant from Tuscany, and his wife, Jeanne de Sanem. However, in the 1990s, evidence was found indicating that the Arnolfinis weren't married until 1447, 13 years after the painting was dated, and 6 years after Van Eyck's own death. This presumably made it skyrocket in value, as portraits painted by ghosts are extremely rare. It was then suggested that the work actually depicted Arnolfini's cousin and his wife, They were married in 1426, which makes it odd that Van Eyck would paint a depiction of their wedding ceremony 8 years later, but not completely impossible. It's also possible that the painting was commissioned when the marriage between Giovanni di Arrigo Arnolfini and his wife was first arranged, as opposed when the ceremony actually took place. If that were indeed the case, you'd think Van Eyck would have made them look a little happier. Kind of a bummer wedding present. American artist Thomas Eakins' most famous work, 1875's The Gross Clinic, depicts Philadelphia doctor Samuel Gross and his medical assistants performing surgery on a patient's thigh. The hyper-realism of Eakins' painting has made it valuable not just to edgelord teenagers, but also to historians, as a chronicle of the 19th century medical practices and the layout of an early surgical theater. The painting was controversial in its day, mostly due to its frank depiction of gore and horror. Notably, Eakins also painted himself into the image. He's the guy taking notes behind and to the right of the doctor. Maybe he's taking notes for the painting? Did we just do an Inception? You probably don't see anything shocking or upsetting about John Singer Sargent's infamous work, Portrait of Madame X. It features a socialite named Virginie Amélie Avegnaud-Gautreau, an American expatriate who had married a prominent French banker, posing in a black satin dress while facing away from the viewer. In terms of risque material, that seems tamer than Big Bird having bare legs on Sesame Street. But in 1884, when Sargent debuted the piece at the Paris Salon, it was considered provocative, if not downright obscene. In particular, viewers noted the looseness of the shoulder strap on Gautreau's dress, which subtly suggested that it was on the verge of slipping down her arm. Scandalous. The painting's reception got so heated and divisive, Sargent removed Gautreau's real name, switching it to Madame X, and painting over the shoulder strap to make it appear more securely fastened. Art historians call this technique the George Lucas maneuver. Nonetheless, the controversy significantly impacted Gautreau's social life and reputation. Her reputation took a nosedive due to the controversy surrounding the painting, to the point that she begged Sargent to cease displaying it publicly. For years, the artist hid the work away in his own studio. Ultimately, he sold it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1916, along with a letter to the museum director calling it the best thing I have ever done. So what do you think? Which painting's backstory surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.